Is your organization's culture helping you deliver your mission, or is it the silent killer of your strategy?
Interesting. Today we're diving into one of the most misunderstood topics in leadership, workplace culture.
Yeah, for many leaders, culture is still just are our people happy? But in reality, it's the infrastructure that determines whether your people and your strategy survives or thrives. Welcome back to You Must Be Woken, the podcast where we have honest and sometimes tough conversations about inclusion, leadership and culture with her, Dawn Hurst.
And him, Craig Richards. And today we're asking, are you trying to manage a 2026 workplace on a cultural operating system designed in the 1980s? And is that infrastructure gap what actually is costing you millions?
Love that question. But before we get into the heavy stuff, Dawn, let's catch up. It feels like I have not seen you in so long. What have you been up to?
Haven't seen you in forever.
It's been a while.
Been doing all sorts. The beginning of the year has been madness, back at work, so all over the place. Had a good weekend, went to a comedy club at the weekend, which was focused on neurodiversity, which was really, really interesting. And that was good fun. And here today. So what about you?
I love it. Yeah, same. Really, really busy the start of the year, but busy the end of the year as well. Normally we take an extended break at Christmas, and my break was shorter this year than normal. Still really good though. And then start the year just back to busy again, which has been lovely. But keeping busy. I did just have a nice long weekend down in Brighton though, with all my gay friends and stuff, which was just so lovely. Bit debaucherous, so less said about that the better. But it was fun.
Tell us lots. We want to know.
That's one for a late night episode, I think, rather than the one we've got here. But yeah, no, all good. Thank you. Okay, right. As always, we like to kick off every episode with a news story to get the conversation flowing. And today, I think it's fair to say we're not short of examples in the news at the moment about culture and where perhaps it's going wrong for some organizations. So I've selected two for us to review today, if you're up for that. I think they might just give us an opportunity to explore why culture is playing such a big part in workplace dynamics in 2026 as well. So the first one was actually a story that was on the Politics Home website. It has been reported more widely, but I've taken the article from there because I thought it was really quite interesting. And it was about a Freedom of Information Act that was revealing that the Ministry of Defence, so in the UK, has paid almost £5 million in bullying, harassment and discrimination settlements in the last 2 years. Massive amounts of money. And we did touch on this previously, didn't we, in a Woke News episode, but I thought it'd be good to explore that in a little bit more detail today. So what's your thoughts on that one?
I think looking at this through the culture lens is going to be so interesting.
Fun.
I mean, apart from which that's our money, obviously, as taxpayers' money, which has been spent on that. So when you start to dissect this and break it down into what's legal and what's actual payout costs, it's fascinating. And particularly when you look at the underlying problems, because it's root cause issues, not just simple symptoms. And that's going to be a key theme, I think, throughout what we talk about today. But the impact of that's been huge. You know, the recruitment figures are down. And, you know, I hear there's a big argument about the fact that in operational environments within the defence sector, you have to make decisions in the moment. But who doesn't?
Yeah.
And is that really an excuse? Yeah. I have quite a view on that. So I appreciate
Don't hold back then.
I just feel that regardless of exceptional circumstances, you know, the brain has time to make a decision that is not going to put somebody at huge risk or actually be the perpetrator of it.
Yeah.
And I think, this particular story looks at basic ethical breakdown, basic ethics, basic treatments, not some of the traditional themes, actually. You know, there is obviously some misogynistic behaviour, but there's nobody accepted from this. So That's my view in terms of the overall summary. We can deep dive into it. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, look, like you, I think it's really interesting. I definitely think it's some root and branch issues here. What we're seeing, I think, is a pattern, and it's so we've chosen the MOD as an example here, but I could name 2 or 3 others straight off the bat. Met Police is a really good example. Great Ormond Street Hospital was in the press just a week ago. All of these things are coming through and are being described today as toxic culture, environments where, in my mind, they're just clashing with where we are today as a society. And, we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail, but it's that infrastructure gap, I think, that we're seeing for these institutions often. And we say institutions because I'm talking about public sector institutions here, but actually, the same could be said in private institutions as well, right? So private sector organizations, even in the third sector, we see very similar things. And I think it's a clash of, in my opinion, an old infrastructure that was suitable for a time or was perhaps built previously, now coming face to face with the reality of a shift in society in 2025, 2026. And I think that's where the kind of breakdown is happening.
I would agree with you. I also think that as part of that breakdown, the resetting of behavioural expectations hasn't been done for 40 odd years.
Yeah.
And a lot of these cases are basic bad ethics.
Yeah. I definitely think that. I think the leadership and behavioural expectations have shifted so significantly, perhaps even in the last 5 years, let alone the last 20 years, right? So, and 20 years ago was only 2006, but that's not actually that long, right? 2006, we don't think of 2006 as being a huge amount of time ago, but it was 20 years ago, right? So if you then take that back to organisations that were perhaps set up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s, that's a long, long time that these institutions have been operating on what I would call a cultural infrastructure.
Yeah.
And if we're not consistently updating that cultural infrastructure, it's out of date, right?
And, I've said this before. I entered the workplace in the 80s and was subject to some really appalling behaviour as a young female, that if that happened today, it would be outcried.
Yeah. So what is it you think then is driving some of that behavioural differences then between previous infrastructure with the current societal norms?
I think at a very basic level, equality in that that hierarchical system is much more in focus. That, if the newspaper today is to be believed, every female between 18 and 21 will be called up if we go to war. And, you apply every layer to that. I think the perception of a difference has changed. I think the perception of acceptability in the workplace has changed. I think the legislation has changed, which protects people more. But I also think there's basic expectation from people. You don't expect to come to work in any environment, whatever that operational need or risk is, and have to be subjected to appalling behaviour.
Yeah. So I really love this theory around hierarchical behaviours and attitudes towards that. So what we saw, I think, particularly in the kind of 70s right through to the noughties, really, I think we saw organizations built on a hierarchical setup model where, certain levels within the organization were the kind of seen as the pillars or put on pedestals, if you like. So let's use the army as an example, right? So if you'd hit a rank that was senior, it was really that you couldn't challenge that level because they were such a senior rank and senior thing. We see the same in hospitals, right? In surgeons and people like that. They have often godlike status, right? And so therefore, people don't challenge or don't feel like they can challenge their behavior. And then their behavior becomes norm behavior. So you used this example a bit earlier about people that went unable to challenge or the behavior in the moment and not thinking, right? And what we saw for a long time in hospital environments was surgeons, particularly in crisis situations, so emergency care, shouting and behaving really inappropriately to support staff, right? Now, I don't buy that. I just don't buy that there's any reason that you have to be rude or inappropriate behavior to people in that environment. Yes, you might be in a command and control environment, right? Where you don't, there's no time for arguments, there's no time for discussions. But that doesn't mean you have to swear at people. It doesn't mean you have to treat people inappropriately.
Push them out the way.
Absolutely, right? So, and yes, you could try and create a psychologically safe environment where people can challenge your decisions and stuff. That's lovely. But in a crisis situation, you can't do that. I accept that, particularly in emergency care or in military situations or in policing situations. But it's not the same thing as shouting at somebody and swearing at somebody during those moments, right? So you can row back from the bad language, you can row back from the inappropriate language and still be in a command and control environment when you need to be. And then when that crisis situation comes to an end, you can then revert to, a more open and pleasant environment. I accept that. But we haven't shifted the dial. So what happened over those years, because these organizations' infrastructure was set up in a way that was, these people are godlike status because they're such important people and they do such amazing work, that suddenly they weren't able to challenge. What we're seeing in society now is that's a different world, right? People are being taught at school to challenge, to ask questions, to think about how they can consistently improve. They're entering the workplace, they're now asking those questions, they're challenging in that way, and the culture is clashing.
And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I would just challenge on one bit, because often those people who weren't allowing challenge weren't the best in the world.
Yeah.
And they weren't allowing challenge because they lack so much confidence themselves. And some of the cases are simply where people have challenged on malpractice towards that godlike creature. And suddenly they've ended up being dismissed, put into a substandard role.
But I think what the difference is that, and that would have been true back then, just as it is true now, right? So they weren't necessarily godlike status. They weren't necessarily as good as they think they were. But because they had the stripe, people saw them that way and therefore didn't challenge them. What's happening now is people are much more confident to challenge. And they are challenging and they are asking those questions, and therefore the culture breaks down and the culture clashes. People are therefore willing to raise a grievance or raise a complaint and stuff. Like, take the Great Ormond Street Hospital example, right? This doctor, Yasser Jabbar, worked at Great Ormond Street between 2017 and 2022. And it's been found now through an independent review done by the Royal College of Surgeons that 94 children that were in his care in that came to harm because of his practice, right? And in their report, they talked about serious concerns in relation to workplace culture. The environment was toxic. Whistleblowers being ignored, right? And that's a symptom of people challenging or being more willing to challenge behaviors, decisions than perhaps they would have done 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and the system not being set up to respond in the right way. So they're operating on an infrastructure that was set up 20, 30 years ago when people didn't challenge those godlike statuses, and they're operating in 2026 when people do, and they're willing to challenge the status. And the organization's not set up for it. They haven't updated their whistleblowing policy. They haven't updated their culture to understand what it means to get people to speak up. So we often hear organizations talking about psychological safety, but haven't done the systems work to change the organization to respond in the right way when people do feel psychologically safe to challenge. Does that make sense?
Yeah, total sense.
And I think that for me is the biggest thing that's happening right now. If you then couple that with the leaders of these organizations not having the knowledge and expertise to change the culture and the infrastructure that sits behind the culture. I look at the Met Police constantly, right? And it's always in the press getting bashed over the head about how terrible the culture is and how the chief needs to sort the culture out. And I always sit there and think, how is that? Mark Rowley at the moment is a copper, right? He is trained to be a police officer. He's not trained in culture change work. He's not trained in systems thinking and organizing. He needs the help and support to be able to make those changes in culture. We saw that in the Riot Women TV series, right?
Absolutely.
They're just clinging on for dear life and hoping to get through to pension age rather than trying to deal with the toxic culture. Because how do you, if you don't have the tools and the skills? It's not a criticism of Mark Rowley. It's a fact of reality. He's been trained as a copper. Why would he?
But you could replace Mark Rowley with a million other people
A hospital
who
or
suddenly feel that they have to do a culture change and they clumsily go about it.
Nice. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the second story that we had, which is the Manchester United story. You and I are both football fans, so this one appealed to me. This was an article in RTE, on the RTE website in Ireland, by a lady called Morona Carraine from Dublin University. And I really enjoyed this article because what she did was a review of the Manchester United Football Club. And at the end of her review, she's come to the conclusion that the current culture at Man United is toxic. 10 managers in 12 years, hundreds of staff cuts, public blame, players thriving when they leave the club elsewhere. A textbook example, if you like, of how toxic culture can destroy performance. What's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I was really glad we got this one. And I have been very privileged in that I've been able to do some hands-on research with a Premier League team who let me talk to a few of their academy players, which was really interesting.
Amazing.
So although we're talking about Manchester United, and I'm not going to name the team who kindly let me have a poke around, but it was very interesting.
Yeah.
And some of the themes are common. So, if we look at what came out of this, that there was a lack of standards, particularly around performance and morale, and therefore the impact on the pitch was huge and the backroom staff were feeling uncomfortable. And those post-Fergie years, which were just managed so beautifully, the strain in the dressing room for that huge club to suddenly be struggling and all of the reasons it might be, the training environment being so changeable with so many different managers and coaches. Yeah. And what I learned from the information that I've been collecting is that the players who join the club are often joining as young as 9-10 years of age into the academy. And they're coming in from schools. And because it's a really prestigious thing to be doing, they're wrapped in cotton wool throughout the academy. And as they progress each year and they're renewed each year, the ego builds.
Sure.
And the misogynistic ego builds. And if we bring it back to a workplace, you've got a senior leadership team, which is your senior players, if you like, and your senior backroom team, who are revered by these, we'll talk about men's football for now, who are revered by these boys and young men as they progress through. And their attitude is transferred.
Yeah.
And therefore, things like they're going out on the town at night and feeling that they are God's gift and coming back in, living off that senior leadership perception. Sure. And therefore, they're not performing as a result of what the management team expect. Yeah. And suddenly, it's that different layers of intervention that you see in the workplace quite often. Yeah. So the consequence is huge, because if you go back to root cause, we're talking about years of instability in this particular environment. And that's often translated into business too. Yeah. And you're also looking at things like the selection is purely on capability, not on conduct. So you're either a good enough player or you're not. And if you're good enough, you get absolutely wrapped in this world that you are suddenly this revered creature. Yeah. And put that in with a manager who is either command or control or training very hard or demanding lots of discipline in a way that isn't respected. And that's a key point, because Fergie expected an awful lot from his people. Yeah. But there's no governance.
Yeah. So, I love that. So it reminds me of a story. I'm a Liverpool fan. There's a story about Jurgen Klopp and one of the academy players who'd had one game in the first team and came to work driving like some kind of Ferrari, I don't know, some posh car anyway, and then like wearing a Rolex and stuff. And apparently Jurgen Klopp said to him, what's that on your wrist? And he said, oh, it's a Rolex, boss. And Jurgen Klopp just rolled his eyes. And then he said to him, what car did you come in this morning? And this kid had talked about this car, and Jurgen Klopp just rolled his eyes, said nothing. He didn't have to say anything. And the following day, with one of these first team players had said, the kid came the next day, no Rolex watch, an old car. He quickly learned that actually that didn't impress the boss at all, right? That's, you can save all of that. You haven't earned your stripes yet. So capability and conduct would be important to somebody like Jurgen Klopp, and that culture of leadership where, you don't get to wear fancy watches and fast cars until you've earned your stripes, and that kind of environment. It does tend to come, doesn't it?
And if you look at some of the big name historic managers, Brian Clough, for example, you weren't playing unless you got your socks up and your shirt tucked in. And Fergie, if you hadn't got a sensible haircut, half of the first team got banned from games for ridiculous haircuts. He did,
Very long, did he, after that?
Absolutely. But what was really interesting, just picking up on what you've just said, when talking to some of these academy players, these lads at 17 are earning £20,000 a week.
Bonkers, yeah.
£20,000 a week. So they can afford the Rolex and they can suddenly. And a number of the people I was talking to had come from a background where they were the first to earn that in a year, let alone a week. And therefore they were loving the ego and the tokenistic point of it. And therefore, when you come back to work ethic and work culture.
And I think that is it, isn't it? It's that culture that you're going into. So there was an interview the other day with Hugo Ekitike, who's a French player that's just started for Liverpool, right? Signed on big money. And he was doing an interview with BT Sports, and somebody said to him, Steven Gerrard's likened you to Fernando Torres. And they said, oh, did you watch him growing up? And he said, no, we couldn't afford Sky TV when I was growing up. Right. I've seen him since on YouTube. And it's that fascinating, isn't it? The environment they've come from. But this bit that interests me the most about these football clubs is, so it is a mixture of that culture and environment that you're entering into, you're bringing them up in, and you can compare that to the workplace as well. What I found really interesting about the Man United story was that Fergie had created this culture. He was there so long. It was a Ferguson culture, right? Yeah. He ran that club from top to bottom. Everything was done the Fergie way, et cetera, et cetera. What's happened over the years, I think, is that we've had new leaders, new managers come in trying to implement their ideas in the football club, but into an environment that was so stubbornly Fergie's environment, right? And we can talk about big shoes to fill. They are big shoes to fill, of course, but actually it's not just Fergie's environment. It was everything, root and branch, the systems, everything was set up the way Fergie wanted it to be set up. And you bring in new managers with their ideas and they're kind of tinkering over here, but they're not doing the whole system. Mm-hmm. They're just doing one part of the system over here, which may be about coaching, or it may be about standards. It may be, whatever it is they want to implement on the club. But when you've got an organization like Man United that had been established under Fergie for so long and been hugely successful for so long, you have to do the whole system. You can't just do, let's set some new behavioral expectations for people, because it's not enough, right? You have to do the systems, you have to do the processes. Everything has to change or has to be updated, if you like, to have a better infrastructure. And this is what I mean about this cultural infrastructure. I think it's so hard for managers because, yet again, are you a manager, are you a coach? You're being brought in to do one thing, or you're being brought in to do the whole thing. That's a big question to ask for a football club these days. But what's more fascinating is, are you looking at the whole system, or are you looking at one part of the system?
And I think you could apply the same to a TV studio. Everybody sees that tiny component. A football club is a business.
Sure.
And behind the scenes, you've got owners, whatever that looks like and whatever their culture is, and that can be good fun. You've got your investors, you've got your supporters who have probably been supporting since they were big enough to read. And you've got this whole pride piece around football, because it creates a real sense of belonging for the supporters, which impacts the community. So this isn't just an hour and a half on a Saturday afternoon. This is a way of life for a lot of people, and it's their entire entertainment, and they invest a lot of money in their season tickets, blah, blah, blah. So, that manager's role when they're coming in, they're not just having to run their bit of the business, which is to get my 12 players out every weekend. It's, I've got to keep my owners happy. I've got to keep my investors happy. I've got to do all my media commitments, keep the sport. I need to commercialise everything I can possibly think of to generate revenue. That's a big gig, isn't it?
It's massive. But I think that's my point, right? Is that, you can come in, we see it quite a lot with organizations that do mergers and acquisitions, right? So we tend to get called when there's been a crisis or when something's gone wrong, or, when like the MOD, £5 million in grievance claims and all of that kind of stuff. That's crisis time. We need to do something about it. Whereas actually, what I would love to see is leaders get ahead of the game with some of that stuff. And now we do quite a lot of mergers and acquisitions work from a cultural lens because of the fact that some of the people that we work with now get ahead of the game because we tell them it's so much cheaper to be proactive than reactive in this environment. Because in a mergers and acquisitions environment, people tend to think about culture last, right? Their priority is we're bringing these teams together, we're saving monies, we're making efficiencies. What they then realize is these teams come together and they clash because the cultures are different or the operating systems are different. And then you get these culture clashes. It's far easier to plan for those in advance than it is afterwards. And the same thing should be about things like Man United or Great Ormond Street or Ministry of Defence, right? You have to be deliberate. I often use this analogy about a garden when it comes to cultures, right?
Yeah.
And you would have heard me do this before, but for the benefit of our listeners, I'll use it again. So your organization culture, whether you're in a football club, whether you're in a hospital, Ministry of Defence, doesn't really matter. Your culture is like a garden, right? It will grow whether you tend to it or not. It's just going to grow, right? Now, whether it grows in a really positive way with lovely flowers.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well... But it's your choice. You have to be deliberate. Right? Nobody ever won the Chelsea flower show, right, by not being deliberate with the choice of flowers and the choice, and then tending the garden and all of that good stuff that comes with it, right? Because if you don't tend to it and you don't manage it, it will become overgrown. The weeds will take over. The rot will set in. All of those kind of things will happen in your garden if you don't manage it.
Which is still a choice.
Right? But if you are deliberate with your garden, you can have the culture you want in the environment that would benefit from it. So you have to be deliberate. You have to choose the flowers you want. You have to choose the trees, the type of earth you're going to put down. All of those things are really important. And it's no different with your culture. You have to choose the culture you want. What type of environment do you want to set up in? And when new owners for a football club come in or a new manager comes in, we have to be really deliberate, right? Do we want them to adapt to the culture that we already have? Or are we giving them permission to change the culture? And if they are going to change the culture, we need to get right behind them so that we change everything, the systems, the processes, so that they're all pointing towards the direction we want to go in. And this is the problem, is we're operating often on infrastructure that we built under the last manager or in the last decade. And now we're operating in a new environment where we've got new laws, we've got new people coming through universities that have been educated differently, entering our workforce. We've got old leadership, new leadership, all of these things. And therefore, the infrastructure needs to be consistently updated. We need to update our culture and our infrastructure.
Absolutely. I love that. I love the fact that, we may be designing a toxic culture.
Yeah, 100%. And we see it so often, right? We're being deliberate. We're leaning into this toxicity. And that's why I really like the Man United story, because it was a great example of a club that was so superb, at the top of its level, top of its game. And then it brought in new managers, and it didn't align all of the systems, or it didn't align the manager to the existing culture. And what we're seeing now under Michael Carrick, I think, who used to play for Fergie, is a bit of a realignment with Fergie's values and Fergie's behaviours. And I think it'll work for the short term, but only for the short term until the owners, Sir Jim Radcliffe and the Glazers and all of that, either decide to be really deliberate. Are we going back to a Fergie culture, or are we going to forge a new culture under Michael or whoever the new manager is going to be, whatever that looks like? What they have to be deliberate with it. Otherwise, it will only be a short-term fix and it'll fall over again. And we see that in football clubs, we see it in workplaces, we see it in institutions, in the public sector, as well as the private sector and the third sector. It's no different where you operate. You have to be deliberate with the type of culture you want, and therefore you have to align things to that.
I love that.
Spirit of conviction.
Seems like a perfect moment to take a break.
Okay.
Because when we come back, it'll be good for us to talk about the so what can we recommend, and what should our leaders do next. We'll tell Man United what they should be doing, shall we?
Love that.
So, Craig, when you're not here arguing with me about whether woke is actually broke,
which it is, by the way,
you're actually out there working with some pretty serious organisations. UK Parliament, Welsh Parliament, major construction and engineering firms. What are you actually doing with these people?
Yeah, great question. Well, look, through EA Consulting, our mission is to support organizations to enhance their performance through people and culture. So we help leadership teams get, real about their culture strategy, for example. Not the performative stuff, the stuff that actually changes how organizations operate and, more importantly, how they perform.
And you measure it, which is the whole point.
Exactly that. Yeah. We don't do anything we can't measure. We design cultural transformation programs. We develop leadership capabilities. We essentially show organizations the business case for getting their culture right. And we've been doing this for over 15 years now, right? Working with some really senior C-suite people as we do that. And that's why we only deliver what drives results.
Interesting. So if your organisation is ready for that conversation, the honest one, visit ea-consulting.group.
So, Dawn, let's get practical. What should organisations then actually do when they want to either understand or change their culture or update their infrastructure? I like that phrase. Let's stick with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've picked 5 or 6 bits of advice, really. I mean, the first is to be really clear on what standards are non-negotiable, whether it be behavioural standards or just really clearly articulate what those standards are.
Sorry to interject there. There's a chap called Simon Sinek, who's one of my idols in our space. He says, and he talks about leaders start with why, and that's what you're articulating there, isn't it? Is what is it and why?
Yeah.
What are you trying to make here and why?
Exactly that. And be really simple and clear about it. We don't do this, we do this. The next piece is about, and this is a topic I see in most of the crisis culture work we do, psychological safety or mental safety and that lack of accountability. So we criticise behaviour, but we don't give the outcome of what it should look like. Yeah. And therefore, the fear surprises everybody because we don't do as much, because we're now fearful, because we don't know where we are, coming back to the first point. The point about entitlement that we bring forward from the football story is really important, because if we are only linking progression or promotion to capability and not conduct, attitude is irrelevant and it becomes toxic. And
we are seeing a slight shift, right? So many years ago, we would see and hear that all the time, right? I know it's Bob, but he's really good at this. Or we always blame Bob, by the way. The fictitious,
or Roberta,
fictitious
as we got
Bob.
picked up on.
So we know his behaviours, but we make an excuse because he's really good at this or he's really good at that. I think we see less of that now than we used to. Maybe not enough of a shift, but we definitely see less of it. I think more organisations are trying to do both capability and conduct.
I think that's true in the UK. I'm still seeing quite a lot in Europe where capability is king.
Yeah. But we still, actually, it's a good point. We do see still quite a lot of command and controls type leadership in Europe as well, and in the States for that matter,
My Next point is a bit controversial because this talks about, your culture's defined by who you remove, not who you recruit.
Oh, I love that.
So we have to be brave to cut quickly. And we all know Bob or Roberta. We could all write their name on a bit of paper, but do we actually do anything about it? Because they're good at their actual technical job. So,
is it just because they're good at their technical job, or is there more to it than that?
I think it's an interesting challenge. I think there's fear always, isn't there? And I think there's acceptance of a certain percentage of behaviour.
Let's explore that for a sec, if we can, because I think it's an interesting one, right? Because we've worked with many leaders who we've challenged in that way. You don't need us to tell you who they are. You could probably write their name down on a bit of paper now, and they often do. And then, we encourage them to be brave to make those decisions, and they do often do that, and it's the right thing to do, and then they see the shift. But there's definitely there's some hesitancy, isn't there, with those leaders? And I'm always interested into what's making them hesitant, right? Is it because of a fear about confrontation? I don't think so. I think most leaders are brave enough to have a difficult conversation. So, and they would generally be supported by, people team, etc. So I think there's a bit of that maybe, but I'm not sure it's that. I wonder whether it's fear of performance dropping and therefore their own position becoming untenable, right? It's a really brave thing to do. Let's go back to the football club for a second. It's a really brave thing for a manager to drop your star player.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Because of his attitude. Because if you then fail to win that week, you're in trouble as a manager, right? And, we have such a short lifespan on performance these days. You're only as good as your last match, or you're only as good as your last set of numbers, right? That's really tough for leaders to make that big decision. So anything that could potentially damage your performance is a really difficult decision to make, particularly if it's a star player or, somebody who's really good at their job capability-wise. And I feel like I want to say, look, I get it. I totally get it. And we often say to leaders, it is a tough decision, but actually we think it'll pay off for you in the long run because the rest of your team and the rest of your performance will improve when everybody understands your standards and what you're setting those standards at.
I think there's another dimension to that, because I also think that if you remove that big head, what's the consequence of the people immediately around that? Because they've tolerated and stayed with that, and perhaps are mirroring that behaviour. And are you going to open the floodgates if you suddenly?
I love it. So I'm gonna ruin my garden analogy by keeping on the metaphor for a second, right? You have, because it's so true, right? So if you've got this bramble bush that's suddenly growing in your garden and is making the place untidy or uncomfortable to sit in, when you cut that back, what happens to the rest of the garden? Sunlight comes and the other flowers start to come through again, right? And it's so true in workplace culture that the symptom is exactly the same and the cure is always the same. More sunlight, more water, and your garden will grow, and it will grow positively again.
Yeah.
Nice. Love that.
My other point is it needs sorting out behind closed doors. I do have some sympathy for these high-profile people or organisations that it's played out in the press. And, the moment you get a sniff of this stuff, do something with it. Because the last thing you want is this plastered over Reddit or
front page of the Mail or whatever. Yeah,
absolutely. So my advice is try and nip it in the bud and keep it behind closed doors. My final couple of points are things like consistency. A plan to change this stuff is not going to happen in 5 minutes. No. And it isn't sexy and exciting. It's hard grunt work, and it has to be repeated and repeated for many years. And we have to stick to the plan even when we think it's not moving quickly enough. Yeah. All of those things are so important. Stability, consistency, and people seeing patterns, and that will embed the change.
I agree. And don't do it on your own, right? So get expertise that can help you with this stuff, right? Because, if you're a head of the Met Police, you're a copper, right?
Yeah.
First and foremost. So don't try and be a culture expert. Be a copper, but be a leader by saying, I need this expertise or this resources. And if you're a politician, stop bashing people over the head for things that they won't know how to fix, and instead find them some budget to actually bring in the resource and the expertise that they need to do this differently, I would suggest. And the same principle for a CEO, right? If you've got these issues in your organization, find the money in your budget to fix it, or otherwise you're going to have to find the money in your budget for grievance claims and settlements claims and all of that kind of stuff. It's going to cost you one way or another. Be a bit more proactive with it.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think as a leader, it starts with you. Whether you're the owner, the investor, the club manager, the CEO, whatever, it starts with you. We must live the culture that we want to aspire to. We must accept feedback. We must accept we make mistakes. We must accept we're not experts in this stuff.
Yeah.
And therefore, in the same way we would bring an expert in to help us with any other part of our business, this is a science. Culture and crisis culture require a scientific approach.
Yeah. And we often talk about this alignment between culture, strategy, leadership, etc., right? So you need to find this kind of alignment of all those systems together to make things work in the right way. And what I'm often seeing when people are doing culture change programs or any kind of change programs really is they're implementing something, whether it's an IT system or whether it's, they're implementing a change of some kind in their organization, whether it's a merger, an acquisition, whatever, but they're not doing the whole system change approach.
Yes.
They're not changing the culture to align with it. And therefore, what happens is it fails or it breaks down further into the cycle. So you need to make sure that you're aligning all of those things to whatever you want them to be. So again, being deliberate with the type of garden that you want. If you want to make a change, you've got to be really deliberate with that. And you have to ask yourself, is my culture set up to support that change? Or is my culture set up to detract from that change? And I did a piece of work with an organization a few years ago who I was in a meeting and the CFO was challenging some of the operators on why they weren't using an internal resource and instead buying this external resource externally. And he flippantly challenged them in a meeting one day. And I said, well, hang on. Let's not do it flippantly. Let's ask the question, right? Why are you not using the internal resource? Why are you going external? And they were like, oh, because we're bonused on speed and cost, and we're expensive internally and slow,
lovely.
right? And I'm like, okay, so straight away there, you're criticizing the teams, but your culture and your systems are not set up in the right way, right? You want people to make this shift to using internal resources, but you're bonusing them on speed and cost efficiencies, which is forcing them to go externally. So your system and your approach are not matching. The easy tweak there is to change the bonus system, and then people are more likely to do what you need them to do, and your culture goes in the right direction. It's
Great
exactly the
example.
same for any culture organization. Telling people to behave differently is one thing, but are your systems preventing them from doing that? Are your systems at the speak up process? Telling people to speak up is one thing. But if when they do, they're not being listened to or they're being ignored, like was the case at Great Ormond Street, then your system's not set up. So you can't just do the people bit. You've got to do the systems bit as well.
And, if you look at those top 2 or 3 reasons why culture fails, it's exactly that. Nothing's connected. It's not systemic. It's not.
We do a workshop.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do a survey. Let's not follow any rules on the survey, but let's just bang out to our staff 300 questions.
Oh, let's pay 10 grand and get an IIP or whatever.
Yeah, isn't it cool?
Aren't we good? Okay. Before we get cynical, Dawn.
Sorry, yeah.
So I think
more gin.
One of the things that I do want people to understand though is what makes the difference then. So we would always recommend, and we have a culture model that we use, the 4-step model. So first thing and the most important thing on our culture model, but in any culture assessment is the actual assessment, right? The audit. what exists today, what's working for you, what's not working for you. We have a 10-stage audit process that we use with proper validity and stuff, but it's about understanding what exists today and those systems and those, the legends that exist in the organization through the lived experience or the values written on the wall, are they actually being lived in decision making and all of that kind of stuff. So first place, audit, understand, right?
Absolutely. Discovery.
Yeah.
It's critical.
And then from there, we go into co-creation. So we talk about, okay, let's align the leaders and the organization on what it is they want to make. What does that look like? And therefore, what would the shift and change need to be? And then we go in stage 3, which is the kind of implementation of some of that. And we always say some of that because you should be iterating it as you go along rather than thinking one design, job and done. Actually, it's not one and done. Often it's an iteration of that work to make sure that you're aligning the people and the systems right across your organization. And then that kind of embedded stage and that links back to your point about consistency, right?
Yeah.
That's, you've then got to live it day in, day out, and just keep tapping that wheel constantly, right?
And that's often the biggest derailing stage because everybody's excited by a bit of audit finding and a bit of, let's do these 4 things of implementation. And then they go, tick, we're done.
Yeah.
Whereas actually embedding is what makes the difference. And that is the difficult, hard yards.
Yeah. It's usually not a 1-year program. That's the first thing to say to leaders.
Well, I've never done a hard 1-year program in 25 years. So.
They fail. It's load of workshops, job done. It never works. Okay. I'm very, very conscious of time. So let's just end that bit around the so what and just around our philosophy for building cultures should be not just about a great place to work, although that's important. It's got to be rooted in that alignment of people, systems and strategy, right? Yeah. They've all got to work in harmony together.
Exactly that. And behind that, lots of the detail.
Yeah.
How do we reward people? How do we set the standards? How do we, all of those good things.
Awesome. Okay. So shall we do some listeners' questions? And then
that sounds...
people watching the pod today might have noticed that we've got a chair in the middle. So we might have a special guest come in a second who wants to ask us a question. But I've got a first question for us from Navrin, is an operations lead in Manchester and sent it via LinkedIn. You talk a lot about psychological safety for staff. But what about leaders? Some of us feel like we can't say we're struggling or we're unsure. How do you build psych safety upwards as well as downwards?
I love that question.
Good question.
And I think certainly as a leader myself, I have felt that. I think it's one of the loneliest places to be sometimes, to be a leader. And my advice would be we have to be honest with ourselves first and foremost. Are we doing the best we can? Are we communicating the best we can? We need to lean in and communicate with our peers or our seniors to be vulnerable and share how we're feeling. I think in terms of cascading, if our own staff can see we're being really open and transparent, they're much more likely to include and feed off us too.
Nice.
So I think it's a very real thing. I think it's perfectly acceptable and I think actually shows very, very powerful leader to go, I don't know.
Yeah. 100%.
I don't know. I need to go and find out.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. I guess for me as well, I would ask the question as how connected is your leadership team? How on the same page are you in that leadership environment or as an exec board? So we do quite a lot of work with exec teams where we get them together and we ask questions like, where's your home team? How connected are you? Like anything, if you want something, you have to be specific. You have to deliberately design it and set it up and educate it in a way that it can adopt those principles. Most leadership teams operate as a committee. So they bring a selection of leaders from different parts of the organization together and say, oh, that's the exco or the leadership team. But are they really a team? And it's a really important question because if you want to create psychological safety, you have to be a team and you have to be a team of peers where you can challenge each other. Steve Jobs used to use this rock rumbling analogy, right? Yeah. So you get bumpy and then eventually the rocks polish and become shiny because they're rubbing up against each other. If you don't have psych safety in your leadership team because you've just got a collection of leaders sat together around a table, as opposed to a team that's really gelling and bonding together, then you'll never get that shiny, that efficiency of a leadership team working together. So I would encourage any leadership teams, particularly at the senior levels, to do some of that work around, building a proper solid team. And ask yourself that really important question. Are you a committee, an executive committee, or are you a team? Or are you a team in name only, right? Because that's usually where psych safety breaks down at that exec level. Nice. Okay, so we have another question from Anonymous, who is the CFO in a third sector organization. The organization recently needed to make some significant redundancies. He said the business needed it, but trust has taken a hit. What's the most effective way for the board to rebuild credibility after a painful restructure?
This is a really interesting question because I'm currently handling a crisis culture change for a client, and they're having this exact issue. They've been through a very public issue. They've been through a restructure. They've lost a proportion of the workforce. And my simple advice is trust is going to take time to rebuild, and it's going to require consistency, honesty, and painful conversations.
Yeah.
And we need to be really sure in how we're communicating. We're being honest, first and foremost. If there's going to be more redundancies, we need to be clear that we're not promising that's it. We're never going to open that door again for 10 years. We need to also be vulnerable in the messaging. This is hitting me. This is how I feel. This is what I do. My door is open for you to talk to me. And I'm going to repeat this message for the next 2, 5, 10 years until you believe that I'm delivering what I've promised to you.
Yeah, nice. I like that. I did a piece of work for an organization that had got into financial difficulty during COVID, right? Really bad. Like they were nearly closed down by the banks and stuff. It was like a last minute rescue deal. And I went to a leadership event where they'd gotten a load of leaders together and the board were basically taking it in turns on stage. And I was watching them for a while, just sat at the back of the room, listening to them doing a Q&A. And in the end, I had to stop and say, right, can we just take a break for 5 minutes? And then I said to the group afterwards, like, what are you doing? You're trying to blag it. Stop it, right? Tell them. Be straight with people and say, I don't know the answer to that. We're in trouble. We've had to make this first round of redundancies. We don't know whether we're going to have to make any more. It's dependent on whether we're successful. And we're hoping with this room of leaders, we might find some of those answers, but we don't have them all. Tell them that. When they did that, right, they went back out on the stage and they said exactly that, almost word for word to their people. Do you know the number one piece of feedback we got after that event, for the event, was we've never felt like the organization has been this honest with us. We're here. And, I'm really pleased to say they're thriving as an organization now. And it isn't because of my intervention, because the only thing I said to them was stop blagging it, right? Tell them why. Explain it. And I just think in these scenarios, trust comes from transparency and honesty, right? And if you don't know the answers, don't blag it.
Exactly.
And if you can't tell them the future, don't, right? Say, I don't know the answer to that. And it might depend on all of us to pull it out the bag. Your team will rally around you. 9 out of 10 times, they'll be right behind you and help you pull it out the bag.
Agree. Totally.
Love that. Okay, so should we see if we've got a live guest who wants to come?
Cruise?
Maybe not Tom Cruise, but let's see if we've got a live guest that wants to come in and ask us a question live.
This sounds fun. Oh, look who's here. Hello. Very well. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good.
Hi.
Welcome.
I might as well join you on your little podcasty.
So everybody, for the benefit of our listeners, this is my son, Jacob.
Yep, it is. And you literally comparing me to Tom Cruise. I literally hit you through that window, my lovely.
It wasn't me, it was Dawn.
Yeah, I heard you, little rascal.
I know. Hi, Tom. How's it going?
Hello.
So, Jacob, I hear you have a question for us.
Yeah, so it's a pretty good one. Me and my auntie cooked up recently.
Okay.
So I watched your podcast and just want to say, here's a little question for you. And I'm sorry if I'm going on a bit of a rant here as well.
Don't know where he gets that from.
Your dad.
So,
I'll just sit back.
Yeah,
Jake.
so basically,
you carry on.
Okay. So, yeah, basically, your book called Woke is Broke.
Yes.
What is woke?
Good question. Over to you, Dawn.
So woke comes from being awake, being awoken into understanding all of those things that are different. And it got turned into being woke.
Yeah.
The challenge is it's now become a bit of a slang for people being too sensitive about topics. So it's become a bit of a negative word, woke.
So when we use the word now, we do it in a way that says we're proud to be awake and aware of all the things that are going on. But actually, we're not too sensitive because we have a bit of a laugh and we have a bit of a joke with it too. We try to make it quite lighthearted because actually being woke, we think, is pretty cool.
Oh, that's good. Well, good for you.
So I have a question for you as well.
All right, then, my lovely.
Because you've just started a new podcast, right?
Oh, yes, I have, me darling. Yes, I have.
And what is it? What is your podcast about?
Oh, it's like me reviewing movies. The good, the bad, and the questionable, but still.
Very good. So what's your favourite movie?
Playmobil movie.
Awful movie.
Okay, you're just a critic then. Get out of my office.
And what's your worst movie?
Well, I think we can all agree on this. All the Sonic movies combined. Just have to put it out there.
Well,
So,
I
yeah.
actually quite like the Sonic movies. So
Okay,
there you go.
okay, yeah. You're just making me off, mate. Honestly, just.
Well, thank you for coming on our podcast.
You're welcome,
I'm
me
sure
darling.
our listeners will be pleased to meet you because I talk about you all the time.
He talks
Yes, you
about
do.
you
Are you going to
always.
stick around for Woke or Joke?
Yeah, sure, I don't mind.
So Dawn,
Yeah.
I think you're doing Woke or Joke this time.
Right.
So
This
you
is
might
for you
have
both,
to
then.
you might have to help me with this one, Jake.
Okay.
All right, my lovely.
Is it
all right.
woke or
It's
is
a
it
good
joke?
one.
Hmm.
It's a good one. So this is a story that was on Reddit. And this talks about an employee team building exercise. And it's a company called Northbridge Solutions. And they're described as this very forward thinking and innovative business. And they went viral with their mandatory team building day.
Oh.
And an employee said that it was sparked by one of the exec team coming back from a leadership retreat, and they were absolutely buzzing about bringing joy to the workplace. So all the team received an invitation to this event called a mandatory team building session on a Saturday
Okay.
at the beginning of January. And this is a business that works Monday to Friday, just to be clear. And the day included a trust circle, 3-legged race in the car park, and an open session where everybody had to bring an idea to the discussion, which will be voted on as to whether it's a good or a bad idea. And then the employee who was interviewed described it as school sports day meets a hostage situation. So, do we
Oh,
think
God.
that's true? As in
Woke.
woke?
Or joke? False. What do you think, Jake? I know what I think.
Well, I barely understand what you people are saying, but if I had to pick one thing, I think I'll have to go with joke, because I don't think that might have happened.
Oh.
And if I'm wrong, I'll drink water or
See,
something.
I think it's true,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
so
okay,
I'm
yeah,
gonna
sure
say
you
woke.
do. Yeah, sure you do. Honestly, always on my opposite side here, Dawn, honestly.
So
Go on,
you
then.
know that whoever gets it wrong has to buy dinner. You understand
Okay,
this?
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
So Dad's buying dinner.
No!
Yes, in your face. Yes.
Well done, Jake. It was a
Okay.
joke.
Oh,
Now-
goodness.
now
I
you
genuinely thought that was going to be sounds about
Yeah.
true.
Now you're gonna invite me a Greg's now, love. Honestly.
Oh, you're cheap, Jake.
Oh, you are.
Okay, so I'm very conscious of time. That's it for another episode of You Must Be Woken. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send us your questions for the next time and hit that subscribe button. But until then, it's bye from me.
Oh, bye from me, Jacob Richards.
And bye from me.
Thanks for watching and listening to You Must Be Woking, the podcast that cuts through the noise for all things diversity and inclusion. We pride ourselves on having honest and sometimes tough conversations. So if you liked our discussions and content today, please do hit the follow, like, and subscribe buttons. It really helps us to reach more listeners. And if you're feeling even more generous, why not leave us a review? It really is the best way for us to grow and help our content reach even more people.